Imagine walking out to your car, expecting a normal day, only to discover your disabled parking sign has been deliberately destroyed, and the person responsible thinks they can get away with it. This isn't just a story about vandalism, it's about power, prejudice, and how one security camera captured a truth that would shock everyone in a courtroom. Last month, my life was turned upside down by what seemed like a simple parking dispute with our homeowners association president, a woman neighbors had nicknamed HOA Karen for her notorious micromanagement and constant complaints. Little did I know that this confrontation would escalate from petty harassment to criminal charges, all because she didn't believe someone like me deserved accessible parking. As someone with a legitimate disability parking permit, I thought my rights were protected, until Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. What started as daily arguments about my parking space would eventually lead to her arrest when a judge reviewed footage that captured her true colors. This is the story of how one woman's prejudice, my determination for justice, and a well-placed security camera created a courtroom moment no one saw coming, especially not the defendant who thought she could destroy evidence and get away with it. The problems began 6 months ago when I moved into Riverside Meadows, a well-maintained residential complex known for its strict homeowners association rules. I had chosen this place specifically because it advertised excellent accessibility features and claimed to be disability-friendly. Armed with my legitimate state-issued disabled parking permit due to my mobility impairment from a car accident 2 years prior, I felt confident this would be a welcoming community. The complex had 3 designated disabled parking spaces, each clearly marked with both ground markings and standing signs displaying the universal accessibility symbol. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. I parked in space 17B, the disabled spot closest to my building, without any issues. The space was conveniently located near the elevator and had the required access aisle for wheelchair users, though I personally relied on a mobility scooter for longer distances and used a walker for shorter ones. Other residents seemed friendly enough, offering polite nods as we passed in the hallways. Then I met Margaret Henderson, but everyone called her HOA Karen behind her back. She was the president of the Homeowners Association and arguably the most powerful person in the complex. A woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that she maintained religiously at the local salon, Karen dressed impeccably and carried herself with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. She had been the HOA president for 7 years running, and some whispered it was because nobody else wanted to deal with the massive headache of challenging her. Our first encounter was on a Tuesday morning when I was loading groceries into my car. Karen approached me with a forced smile, her eyes scanning my vehicle and then settling on my disabled parking placard hanging from the rearview mirror. "I don't believe we've met properly," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Margaret Henderson, HOA president. I couldn't help but notice you've been using the disabled spaces regularly." I explained that I had a legitimate permit and showed her the placard up close. She examined it with unnecessary scrutiny, turning it over multiple times as if searching for signs of forgery. "Interesting," she mused, handing it back. "You know, we have a lot of elderly residents here who also need these spaces. I hope you're not taking advantage of the system." The comment stung, but I maintained my composure and explained my medical situation briefly. Karen listened with what appeared to be skepticism, her eyebrows raised slightly. "Well, we'll see," she said cryptically before walking away, her high heels clicking authoritatively on the pavement. Over the following weeks, Karen's behavior escalated. She would show up whenever I parked, demanding to see my permit repeatedly. She questioned other residents about my legitimacy, asking if they'd ever seen me use mobility aids. She started taking photos of my car in the disabled space, claiming she was documenting potential violations for the next HOA meeting. I discovered through neighbors that Karen had a history of targeting residents she deemed undesirable. The previous year, she had harassed a young mother with a newborn, insisting that late-night crying was a noise violation. Before that, she had tried to ban dogs over 30 pounds, claiming they were automatically aggressive breeds. Now, apparently, I was her new target. The harassment intensified when Karen learned I was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. She began spreading rumors that I wasn't really disabled since I didn't leave for a traditional job every day. She posted passive-aggressive notes on community bulletin boards about disabled parking abuse and how truly disabled people look a certain way. One Thursday afternoon, I decided to install a small security camera facing my parking space. I had grown tired of the constant monitoring and wanted to document any future harassment. The camera was discreet, mounted inside my apartment window with a clear view of the parking area. I didn't mention this to anyone, not even my closest neighbors, sensing that Karen had some informants among the residents. 3 weeks later, I woke up to discover the standing disabled parking sign had been severely damaged. Someone had used a saw or similar tool to cut it about 2 feet from the base, leaving it hanging awkwardly to one side. The ground markings had been covered with black spray paint, effectively erasing the words disabled parking and the access aisle lines. My parking space had essentially been eliminated overnight. I immediately called the HOA office, reaching Karen directly. "Oh my," she said with fake surprise. "That's terrible. You know, sometimes these signs just deteriorate. Metal fatigue, weather damage, that sort of thing. And kids these days with their spray paint pranks. It's a real problem in the neighborhood." I pointed out that the sign appeared to have been intentionally cut, showing clean saw marks. Karen dismissed this, suggesting it might have been damaged during recent maintenance work. "The groundskeeping crew can be careless," she said. "I'll look into it, but these things take time to process through proper channels. In the meantime, you might want to park in regular spaces. We wouldn't want anyone to think you're taking advantage of a damaged sign." This was clearly retaliation for my continued use of the designated space despite her harassment. I informed Karen that I would be filing a formal complaint and possibly involving the local disability rights advocacy group. Her tone immediately changed from feigned concern to barely concealed hostility. "Now, let's not get dramatic," she said. "I'm sure we can resolve this like adults. Besides, accusations without proof are just that, accusations." Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated further. Karen had the maintenance team paint over the remaining disabled parking ground markings, claiming they were faded and needed refreshing. However, they never repainted the actual disabled parking indicators, just regular parking space lines. When I confronted her about this obvious violation of ADA compliance, she produced a work order that supposedly showed the disabled markings were scheduled for repainting next month. I reached out to the city's disability compliance office and filed a formal complaint. They scheduled an inspection for the following week. In preparation, I decided to check my security camera footage, which automatically saved recordings for 30 days. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The timestamp showed Karen arriving at my parking space at 2:47 a.m. on the night the sign was damaged. She was wearing dark clothing and carrying what appeared to be a hacksaw. For 23 minutes, the footage showed her systematically cutting through the metal signpost, stopping occasionally to look around nervously. After the sign was cut, she took out cans of spray paint and methodically covered all the ground markings. The video quality was excellent, clearly showing her face and actions under the parking lot lights. But she wasn't alone. 2 men were with her, one I recognized as the complex's maintenance supervisor, and another who appeared to be his assistant. They helped hold the sign steady while she cut and assisted with the spray painting. The footage showed them laughing and talking comfortably, clearly indicating this was a coordinated effort, not a spontaneous act of vandalism. I was stunned. This wasn't just harassment, this was a criminal conspiracy to violate federal disability protection laws. I immediately made multiple copies of the footage, storing them on different devices and in cloud storage. I also contacted a lawyer who specialized in disability rights cases. My attorney, James Rodriguez, was equally shocked by the footage. This is one of the most blatant violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act I've seen in my 15 years of practice, he said. And the fact that she involved HOA staff members makes this a conspiracy charge as well. We're looking at multiple felonies here. We decided to proceed with both civil and criminal complaints. James filed the necessary paperwork with the police department, requesting they investigate the vandalism and ADA violation. He also submitted complaints to the State Housing Authority and the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Meanwhile, Karen continued her pattern of denial and deflection. When the city inspector arrived and found the disabled parking space in clear violation of ADA standards, she blamed the maintenance company, claiming they had misunderstood the work order. She appeared genuinely surprised when the inspector issued immediate violation notices and demanded the space be properly restored within 48 hours. As for the vandalism, Karen stuck to her story about unknown pranksters or careless maintenance. She even suggested I might have damaged the sign myself to create a victim narrative for attention. This accusation particularly infuriated me, but my lawyer advised against direct confrontation. Let the evidence speak for itself, he counseled. The police investigation moved slowly initially. The assigned detective seemed skeptical about the significance of a parking dispute until James provided a detailed brief on ADA violations and the potential criminal charges involved. The security footage was submitted as evidence, and suddenly the case gained priority. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Detective Martinez. "Ms. Johnson, I need you to come down to the station," he said. "We're filing formal charges against Margaret Henderson, and we need your testimony. Also, you should know, she's being arrested this afternoon." The news sent a mix of emotions through me. Relief, vindication, but also a strange sadness. All of this could have been avoided if Karen had simply respected my legal right to accessible parking. The arrest happened during an HOA board meeting. Karen was presenting the monthly budget when Detective Martinez and 2 uniformed officers walked in. Security footage later showed, yes, the HOA office had its own cameras, the color draining from Karen's face as the detective announced she was under arrest for vandalism, conspiracy, and violations of federal disability rights laws. Other board members sat in stunned silence as handcuffs were applied. One resident later told me that Karen kept repeating, "This is a mistake. I don't know what you're talking about," even as they let her out. The maintenance supervisor and his assistant were arrested the same day at their homes. News of the arrest spread through the complex rapidly. Suddenly, neighbors who had previously kept their distance were stopping by to apologize, admitting they had been aware of Karen's harassment but hadn't known how to help. One elderly woman confessed that Karen had convinced her I was faking my disability because I looked too young and healthy. The preliminary court date was set for 2 weeks later. My lawyer assured me this would likely just be for formal charges and bail proceedings. "The real drama will come at trial," he said, "when we present that security footage in court. She has no idea we have it." The day before court, I received an unexpected visit from Karen's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who introduced himself as Thomas Wells. He explained that his client was willing to settle out of court. "Miss Henderson deeply regrets the misunderstanding," he said, stumbling over the careful language. "She's prepared to make a formal apology, pay for all repairs and additional disabled parking improvements, and step down from the HOA board." I told him I'd consider it but wanted to hear Karen's explanation firsthand in court. Something about the whole situation still didn't add up. Why would a HOA president risk criminal charges over a parking space? There had to be more to this story. The morning of the court appearance, I arrived early with my lawyer and my security footage evidence. The courtroom was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the case, and local media had picked up the story as an example of disability rights violations. Karen entered escorted by her lawyer, looking noticeably different from her usual polished appearance. Her hair was less perfectly styled, and she appeared to have aged years in the past weeks. The initial proceedings were routine until the judge asked Karen to explain her actions regarding the vandalism charges. She maintained her innocence, claiming she was being framed. Then, her lawyer made a fatal mistake. He suggested that there was no reliable evidence linking Karen to the vandalism. That's when my lawyer stood up. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to present security footage that clearly shows the defendant committing the alleged crimes. The judge nodded, and the courtroom's attention focused on a large monitor as the night vision footage began to play. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Audible gasps came from the gallery as Karen appeared on screen, hacksaw in hand. The judge leaned forward, studying the footage intently. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. Her lawyer frantically whispered something to her, but she seemed frozen, watching herself commit the crimes she had just denied. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the security footage continued to play. Every detail was crystal clear, Karen's face illuminated by the parking lot lights, the deliberate way she handled the hacksaw, the systematic methodology with which she destroyed the disabled parking sign. The timestamp at the bottom of the screen ticked forward relentlessly, each second further incriminating the woman who had spent weeks claiming her innocence. I watched as people in the gallery, many of whom I recognized as fellow residents of Riverside Meadows, began whispering among themselves, shock evident on their faces. The judge paused the video at a particularly clear frame showing Karen's face and the hacksaw. "Miss Henderson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "is this you in the video?" Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lawyer immediately jumped in, requesting a brief recess to confer with his client, but the judge denied the request with a wave of his hand. "The court is waiting for an answer, Miss Henderson." I don't." Karen stammered, her usual commanding presence completely shattered. The footage resumed, showing the meticulous way she spray-painted over the disabled parking markings while her two accomplices assisted. More gasps echoed through the courtroom as the full extent of the vandalism became apparent. This wasn't a moment of anger or poor judgment, it was a calculated, premeditated act of destruction. Judge Robert Harrison, a man with over 20 years on the bench, removed his glasses and looked directly at Karen. "Miss Henderson, in my 22 years as a judge, I have rarely seen such a blatant violation of both property law and civil rights so clearly documented. Not only did you vandalize property designed to serve disabled individuals, but you orchestrated a conspiracy involving at least 2 other individuals, and then lied about it in this court." Karen finally found her voice, though it was shaky and desperate. "Your Honor, I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to enforce the HOA rules. I thought she was taking advantage of the system, and I got carried away. I made a terrible mistake." The judge's expression hardened. "Miss Henderson, this wasn't a mistake. This was a series of deliberate choices made over the course of several weeks. You didn't just damage property, you violated federal law designed to protect the rights of disabled individuals. Furthermore, you attempted to cover up your actions by implicating others and lying to investigators." He turned to my lawyer. "Mr. Rodriguez, what is your client seeking in this matter?" My lawyer stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client seeks several things. First, the immediate restoration of all damaged disabled parking facilities at Riverside Meadows, along with the installation of additional accessibility features to prevent future violations. Second, we're requesting a formal public apology from Ms. Henderson, to be published in local media and posted prominently throughout the residential complex. Third, we're seeking legal fees and damages for the harassment my client endured. Most importantly, we want accountability, both legal consequences for the criminal acts committed and systemic changes to prevent such violations from occurring again." Before the judge could respond, Karen suddenly stood up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I've always prided myself on following rules, on maintaining order in our community. When I saw Ms. Johnson using the disabled space, I couldn't understand why someone so young needed it. I made assumptions, terrible assumptions, and I let those assumptions control my actions. I felt an unexpected surge of emotion hearing her words. Part of me wanted to believe her remorse was genuine, but I had endured months of harassment and intimidation. Her apology, while perhaps heartfelt in the moment, couldn't erase the systematic way she had tried to strip away my legal rights. The judge allowed her to continue. I know what I did was wrong. Watching that video, seeing myself, I barely recognized that person. The stress of being HOA president, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to maintain property values, it's no excuse, I know. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing residents as problems to be solved rather than people to be served. She turned toward me directly. Ms. Johnson, I'm especially sorry to you. You've shown me how my prejudices and preconceptions hurt people. I never took the time to understand your situation, never considered that invisible disabilities are just as valid as visible ones. I let my role as HOA president give me a false sense of authority over others' lives, and I abused that position terribly. The courtroom fell silent again as Karen sat down, visibly shaking. The judge took a moment before speaking. Ms. Henderson, while I appreciate your apology, good intentions or stress do not excuse criminal behavior. You've been charged with vandalism, conspiracy, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. How do you plead? Karen's lawyer looked resigned as he stood. Your Honor, in light of the irrefutable evidence presented, my client changes her plea to guilty on all charges. The guilty plea sent a wave of murmurs through the courtroom. The judge nodded slowly, then addressed the assembled attorneys. Given the serious nature of these crimes and their impact on civil rights, I'm prepared to issue my ruling today rather than scheduling a separate sentencing hearing. He referred to his notes briefly before continuing. Margaret Henderson, you are hereby sentenced to 6 months in county jail, with the possibility of work release after 30 days, provided you comply with all court-ordered conditions. Additionally, you are fined $5,000 and ordered to perform 200 hours of community service specifically with disability advocacy organizations. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership capacity anywhere in this state. You will pay full restitution for all damages, including Ms. Johnson's legal fees. The Riverside Meadows HOA, under your direction, must undergo a complete accessibility audit and implement all recommended improvements within 60 days. Failure to comply will result in additional fines and potential federal intervention. Karen's shoulders slumped as the full weight of the sentence sank in. But Judge Harrison had one more declaration. Because this case represents a clear violation of federal disability rights laws, I'm ordering that it be forwarded to the appropriate federal authorities for additional investigation. The systematic nature of this harassment and the conspiracy involved suggest this may not be an isolated incident. He turned to address me directly. Ms. Johnson, I commend you for your patience and persistence in seeking justice. Cases like yours help establish important precedents that protect the rights of all disabled individuals. I hope this resolution brings you some measure of peace and ensures that such violations don't happen again, either to you or to others in your community. As the court proceedings concluded, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but the whole situation felt surreal. Just 3 months ago, I had been living quietly in my apartment, focused on my freelance work and adjusting to life in a new community. Now, I was at the center of a legal case that had garnered local media attention and resulted in criminal convictions. Outside the courtroom, reporters immediately surrounded both Karen and me. Karen's lawyer quickly escorted her to a waiting car, but I paused to speak with the press, feeling a responsibility to address the broader issues the case had raised. This isn't just about one person's actions, I explained to the gathered journalists. It's about the invisible barriers that disabled people face every day. Disabled parking spaces aren't a convenience for us, they're a necessity that allows us to participate in our communities. When someone deliberately destroys these accommodations, they're not just damaging property, they're denying us access to public spaces. One reporter asked about my feelings toward Karen now that justice had been served. I took a moment to consider my response. I hope this experience changes how she views disability and accessibility. What she did was wrong, and there needed to be consequences. But I also hope she uses this opportunity to become an advocate for better inclusivity and understanding. The following weeks brought significant changes to Riverside Meadows. The HOA brought in an accessibility consultant who conducted a comprehensive review of the entire complex. New disabled parking spaces were added, complete with proper signage and access aisles. Curb cuts were improved, automatic door openers were installed at main entrances, and all pathways were assessed for wheelchair accessibility. A new HOA board was elected, with several residents who had previously felt intimidated by Karen stepping up to serve. The board's first official act was to establish a resident rights committee specifically focused on ensuring discrimination of any kind would not be tolerated in the community. Karen served her sentence as ordered, spending 2 months in county jail before being granted work release. During her community service hours with the local Disability Advocacy Center, she reportedly became an active participant in disability awareness workshops, sharing her story as a cautionary example of how unconscious bias can lead to serious harm. 3 months after the trial, I received an unexpected letter from Karen. In it, she wrote extensively about her experience working with disabled individuals during her community service. She described how eye-opening it had been to hear stories from people with various disabilities, some visible, some invisible, and how much her perspective had changed. I thought I understood what it meant to be disabled, she wrote. I had such a narrow, stereotypical view. Working at the Advocacy Center, I've learned about the spectrum of disabilities, the daily challenges people face, and the remarkable resilience of the disability community. I realize now that my actions weren't just illegal, they were rooted in ignorance and prejudice I didn't even recognize I had. She went on to describe specific people she had met during her service: a young man with multiple sclerosis who looked completely healthy but struggled with fatigue and mobility, an elderly woman with early-stage dementia who needed visual cues and routine, a veteran with PTSD who required quiet spaces and clear communication. Each person taught me something different about what disability looks like and what accommodations mean in practice, she explained. Karen also detailed the changes happening at Riverside Meadows. I'm so proud of how the community has responded. People are talking about accessibility in ways we never did before. Residents are sharing their own needs more openly, and we're creating a more welcoming environment for everyone. I know I can never undo what I did, but seeing these positive changes gives me hope that something good came from this terrible situation. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her sometime, not for forgiveness. She emphasized that wasn't something she expected or felt entitled to, but to continue her education and understanding. I'm committed to being better, she wrote. Not just as a person, but as a member of the community. I want to be someone who advocates for accessibility and inclusion, someone who uses their voice to ensure others don't repeat my mistakes. I considered her request carefully. The trauma of her harassment still affected me. Some days I still felt anxious walking to my car, wondering if someone would question my right to accessible parking. But I also recognized the potential value in dialogue and education. 6 months after the trial, I agreed to meet with Karen at a neutral location, an accessible cafe downtown that had become a favorite of mine. She arrived early, looking nervous but sincere. We talked for over 2 hours, and I was struck by how genuine her transformation seemed. She had educated herself extensively about disability rights and accessibility, and she spoke passionately about the advocacy work she was doing. I've learned that true accessibility isn't just about ramps and parking spaces, she said at one point. It's about attitudes, about creating environments where everyone feels welcome and valued. I spent so much time focusing on rules and property values that I forgot about people. Our conversation led to an unexpected collaboration. Karen proposed creating a disability awareness program for HOAs throughout the state, using her experience as both a cautionary tale and an educational tool. Together, we developed a workshop series that covered legal requirements, practical accessibility improvements, and most importantly, the human stories behind the need for accommodation. The program gained traction quickly. HOA boards from across the state began requesting our presentations, and local disability advocacy organizations endorsed our approach. We spoke at conferences about turning conflict into education, about the importance of lived experience in shaping policy, and about the power of genuine accountability in healing community divisions. 1 year after the trial, Riverside Meadows was recognized by the state as a model accessible community. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The complex that had been the site of a high-profile disability rights violation had become a showcase for inclusive living. New residents specifically chose Riverside Meadows because of its commitment to accessibility and inclusive community practices. During the recognition ceremony, I stood at the podium looking out at a crowd that included many familiar faces, neighbors who had witnessed the months of harassment, the judge who had delivered such a thoughtful ruling, the detective who had taken the case seriously, and Karen herself, sitting in the back row. This award belongs to everyone who believed that our community could do better, I said in my speech. It belongs to those who spoke up when they witnessed discrimination, to those who worked tirelessly to implement real changes, and yes, even to those who made mistakes but chose to learn from them and became advocates for change. After the ceremony, Karen approached me quietly. I know I say this every time we meet, but I want you to know how grateful I am that you gave me the chance to make this right. Not just the legal resolution, but the opportunity to grow and contribute to something positive. I looked at her, seeing not the angry, prejudiced woman who had harassed me, but someone who had genuinely transformed through education and experience. We all have biases, I replied. The difference is what we do when we become aware of them. You chose to face yours head on and do the hard work of changing. That's made all the difference. As the sun set that evening, I walked to my car, parked in one of the clearly marked disabled spaces, complete with new bright blue paint, updated signage, and extra wide access aisles. The transformation of the parking area was a visual metaphor for the larger changes that had occurred. Where once there had been conflict and discrimination, there was now understanding and acceptance. Looking back on that night when I installed my security camera, I never could have predicted how things would unfold. What started as a simple desire to document harassment had catalyzed a community-wide transformation that rippled far beyond Riverside Meadows. The footage that captured Karen's vandalism had become a teaching tool, used in workshops to demonstrate how unconscious bias can lead to harmful actions. More importantly, it had sparked conversations about disability, accessibility, and inclusion that continued to evolve. Residents who had never thought about accessibility before were now actively identifying barriers and suggesting improvements. Children in the complex were growing up with a natural understanding of universal design and inclusive communities. As I settled into my apartment that night, I received a text from an unexpected source, Detective Martinez, who had handled the original criminal case. Just wanted you to know, it read, that your case has been used as training material for our department on disability rights violations. You've helped make real change here too. I smiled, thinking about how a simple act of vandalism had ultimately led to so much positive change. The journey hadn't been easy, there had been anxiety, frustration, and moments of despair. But it had also brought out the best in people, shown the power of standing up for what's right, and demonstrated that even the most entrenched biases can be overcome with education and genuine commitment to change. The story of HOA Karen cutting my disabled parking sign had ended with her arrest when the judge saw my security footage. But the legacy of that moment, the conversations it sparked, the changes it implemented, and the bridges it ultimately built, would continue to influence our community for years to come. Sometimes, justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation, education, and the courage to build something better from something that started out wrong.